Well, good morning. I'm Jeff Coleman.
And I'm Debra Pinkerton. Welcome to Morning Light. And today is the first day of summer. It officially begins at 10:32.
Finally, 10:32 tonight.
Yes, tonight. Okay. And the sun's shining, so that's a good thing.
It's a good thing. It is hard to find a work-life balance when there's no clear start or end to the workday. Do you experience that? Our Morning Light panel will discuss what it would mean to embrace the old principle of Sabbath rest.
That's important. But first, here's a preview of what's coming up later in the show. June is recognized as Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month. Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. It causes problems with memory, thinking, and behavior. Learn the signs and symptoms of Alzheimer's later in the show.
And I think we're meeting Alzheimer's with faith and not fear, but it is a very fearful thing for families who get that diagnosis.
It is.
Well, for decades, American workers have been waiting to cash in on the promise of a shorter, easier work week, the death of 9-to-5 drudgery. In 1930, British economist John Maynard Keynes predicted machines, specifically communications technology and automation, would take the pressure off us, the humans. This would include a little short-term pain, maybe some job losses, in exchange for a higher standard of living. Well, Keynes also predicted by 2030, that's coming up, people would only work 15 hours a week. That's just 3 hours a day. Are we getting close to that number? I don't know.
That sounds good to me.
Yeah.
Well, that was 95 years ago, and Mr. Keynes was right about a lot of it. Automation, transportation, artificial intelligence, and instant communication has freed many of us from the factory floor and other back-breaking jobs.
I still have to mow the lawn today.
That's not back-breaking.
Well, come on.
But that's exercise.
That's true.
But Microsoft has used trillions of data points for a new study of our work habits. Take a listen to this. We never stop working. Before 6 a.m., many of us are already responding to emails.
Never, Deborah, never.
We work evenings, after hours, and weekends. Every second of the day is invaded by requests. The results? Chaos.
But I need to know what's in my
inbox. It is so time-consuming.
But Deborah, it wasn't always this way. For centuries, Pennsylvania's legislature passed a category of laws preventing overwork and protecting Sabbath rest. At the beginning of a 7-day week, Sundays were, for the most part, a day of rest for Pennsylvanians. But in 1978, the PA Supreme Court ruled so-called blue laws were unconstitutional. But there's still one on the books. You can't sell a car or buy a car in Pennsylvania on Sunday. So will AI deliver the promise of work-life balance? Will technology create sweat-free work experiences? And did we make a mistake when we decided the old blue laws had to go altogether? Our Morning Light panel will tackle these questions. Davis Younts and two pastors, Joe and John, are here today. Glad to have you all.
Good to be back. Good to be back.
Some people may not get this, well, because they maybe have been retired for maybe a decade or longer. And so this idea of watching their kids around the dinner table or their grandchildren talk about work experiences but not make eye contact because they're still working, I just got to finish this last email, or they stay over at the house and you get a glimpse into their life, which is as soon as, right with the breakfast and the muffin and all that, is work. Davis, describe what is actually happening. What are we experiencing in this moment of the infinite workday?
I think the challenge that we're facing is there's no distinction, there's no removal from work. We bring work home with us just with a cell phone. And we are, not only do people have instant access to us, but we have instant access to things going on at work. So there's that constant temptation to be checking email, to be checking in, to send that text message. So it used to be, for my dad, he left the office, got in the car, and he had a 30-minute drive home sometimes. That was a break between work and coming home.
Yeah.
You're bringing it home with you now. And that's, I think, the real issue is that balance isn't created by that natural separation anymore.
John, is the expectation changed from the person who's sending the email, right, or the text message, that you respond within 5 minutes or 10 minutes, and then you have to explain, perhaps, why you didn't respond in 5 minutes? What's happening there?
I think that's definitely a pressure. You just have to love people well enough to be willing to disappoint them.
Explain that a little bit.
Well, so just because people are expecting that kind of thing, I understand. I'm speaking in context where for some professional cultures, they would be seen as not doing their job if they didn't respond immediately, or they sort of be. But if
But
someone,
we're not just talking air traffic controllers here, right?
no, yeah, exactly. Well, that's where, right, someone, if they think someone is pressuring them to do something that's going to make them neglect their family or things like that, they should forego that and not seem like they're the new up-and-coming person.
Right.
But I also think there's an issue with how even you phrase the question, in the sense of when we think of work-life balance, we're already now separating work as something separate from our life, as if real life doesn't involve working well, working hard, and being diligent. And I think a lot of the problem is some of the technology makes people do things constantly but inefficiently, rather than working really hard and then also resting well and then working. But when the idea of life and then work, like work is cursed, but work isn't the curse.
Wow. People are taking notes on this conversation. I know that. One of the areas, in addition to the instant communications, is meetings, right? So this study shows that 57% of meetings are now ad hoc in the workplace, meaning somebody just walks in, say, can we meet? And the expectation is, this is a superior, or this is a colleague, I don't want to create tension, so I'm going to leave my lunch in the fridge because I can't. What's happening there with expectations?
Well, I always, a couple of things that I try to train not only my family, but people in my congregation and people that are part of my, professional circle, is we have to not have an expectation that every single time I call you or I text you or email you, immediately you should respond. Because we have to have that balance. And so there's been times where I've sent an email to someone late in the evening because I'm going to bed, I'm just checking everything, and they respond right there. And I said, well, my expectation wasn't that you were sitting there looking at your email, but when you were available, that you would respond to me. I think it's important for us to set those expectations, because if not, we do lose that balance. You know, when my wife's company years ago started paying for her cell phone bill, and the expectation was 24/7, if we need you, that you should be available. We have to set that expectation that there is a balance, that if you send me an email or a text message, I might not respond right then because I might be spending time with my buddy Davis, I might be spending time with my children or my grandchildren, and because of that, I need to separate that and say, I will get back to you, and I haven't ignored you, but yet these things are important as well, and I have to give them the proper attention also. Helpful.
When I said the word Sabbath, a lot of people that really sounded like Amish, right? It sounded like you're so, why do you have to be so rigid in your construct of the way that you view your life, that you have to set these rules? I should be able to make these decisions for myself. I don't want the government, I don't want anybody telling me what I can and can't do on what day or when or how. I want to worship in my own way and rest in my own way. Did they get it right or wrong, the Supreme Court in 1978, when they said blue laws, just setting those legal boundaries because life was leaking into other parts of life that maybe shouldn't on certain days?
Yeah, I think they did legally. As an attorney, I can say that because the government shouldn't have to engage necessarily in setting those boundaries, but really the church should be teaching that, so it shouldn't be an issue, right? That's what we want. We want revival and reform in society to the point where there's no disconnect there. That makes sense to everyone, and it is valuable. We need that rest built in and to our week. That's how God created us. So it is important. It's just, I don't always like that the government has to step in. But again, if the church is failing, then often the government picks that up because the government sees the chaos that creates.
So apparently the church where the owners of Chick-fil-A and Hobby Lobby attend, they got that message, because they're to the world looking outside in, they're losing a lot of money that they could be making on Sundays. How do you instill this culture without being legalistic, and how do you set this expectation that the culture shouldn't have the infinite workday, which Microsoft is saying? Because we're not on track to get to a 3-hour workday, right? I think you'd agree, John?
Well, and again, with God making human beings in His image to be productive and creative, I don't think the idea of a 3-hour workday is even attractive, right? As far as if someone is actually saying, what I want is 3 hours of serving other people, and then the rest of the time I can just do whatever I want. I don't think that's actually the vision that the Bible would say. And obviously, that's different from like employment expectations. I don't want to. The Bible, when it says 6 days you shall work, it's not saying 6 days you shall be at the beck and call of an employer. So the Bible has a much bigger category of work and rest than we often engage in. But speaking of the Sabbath, right, I would say, like, we talk about it in our Presbyterian Reformed tradition as the Lord's Day. And yes, there's this ceasing from certain work, but also we don't talk about any other holiday in the sense of focusing on the things that we shouldn't do. Right? We don't go to maybe you don't sing God Save the King on like 4th of July,
Right.
but we don't focus on that, right? We focus on like, what do we get to do? What are we here to do? Celebrate that Lord Jesus Christ has forgiven us from our sins and is risen from the dead, that we get to gather with brothers and sisters and serve people. And so I think that sort of attitude is, again, separate from the bigger categories of work and rest.
That's helpful. Joe, if you were to give advice to someone who is like, this is me, or someone's listening and said, that's my son, that's my daughter, I need to sit them down and talk to them. Is there a better way to engage this and kind of ask God to help you get to a place where you can accept a day of rest or some time to not do the same kinds of work, but to shift work that nourishes your soul or your body?
Absolutely, and I've always taught on this over the years, because when I understood the concept of the Sabbath rest, I understood what was the foundation behind it. And first and foremost, when we have gone away from the blue laws, it's an indication that this society has become more secularized, and the Judeo-Christian foundation that this country was founded on. There was an expectation that on a particular day we all gathered together and worship, and we honored God, and we focused on those things.
The law was working for the people.
Yes, absolutely. But at the end of the day, when we turn away from that, it's very easy for us to lose focus. So you think about the traditional idea of the Sabbath was you would spend time honoring God in your life. You also spend time honoring your family and giving thanks for those type of things. And I think about a society that has become more secularized and not focused on those things. We have lost a lot of those important things. Like our families aren't as strong overall, and I'm using general terms, as they were, because we don't spend time. A lot of times we eat on the run. My children might grab the sandwich on the way out, as opposed to sitting down, focusing on each other, honoring God, and really focusing on what's important, because the most important parts is our family and our relationship with God and our job. I think about how many people have worked on a job for 30 years and then the company downsized and you lost your job immediately. And that same day they put out an ad, this position is open now. Who wants to fill that position? So the things that are important, that are eternal, are the things that the Sabbath helped us to focus on, I believe.
Focus on the eternal. That's the final word today. Thank you all very, very much. Great conversation. Well, June is Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month. We'll share some of the signs of the disease and who is most at risk. That's up next. And you're watching Morning Light right here on Lighthouse TV.
This year, statistics show more than 7 million Americans over the age of 65 have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, an increase of about 300,000 patients from last year. It breaks down to about 1 in 9 older adults. Alzheimer's changes typically begin in the part of the brain that affects learning. Some people with memory loss may find it hard to recognize they have a problem. Here to talk more about Alzheimer's and other brain disorders is Morning Light medical contributor Dr. Richard Rayner with Aspire Health Concepts. Dr. Rayner, thank you so much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Let's talk about Alzheimer's.
Yeah. So Alzheimer's is a condition that comes under the umbrella of an even larger denomination of conditions that we would call dementia. But Alzheimer's fits in a subcategory of that designation, and because it has actually very specific pathological findings in a person's brain.
So what are some of the signs and symptoms?
Yeah, Alzheimer's usually starts in the 7th decade, late 60s, mid to late 60s, early 70s. And people start to notice that they are just forgetful, can't recall the names of things per se, But most often it's their family and friends that are pointing it out to them that they seem to be forgetting. This is in the very early stages, and there is, but that's the initial thing, just kind of losing things, forgetting to turn off, you know, the water or things like that.
So if you notice that, or if a family member notices something like that, what should they do? What should they suggest?
Yeah, well, of course, the loving thing is to always just talk to the person first and say, hey, I'm noticing this. Are you noticing that? What? And then a lot of times in the very beginning, there's a lot of denial by the person. And that's driven by they don't recognize it, which is, again, another one of the hallmarks of it. But also, it's a fearful thing to think about. And, you know, the truth is, if you talk to anybody who's 55 or over, they're going to tell you they can't find the words and they can't find the names of things. So we're not talking about that. And I've had many people over the years come to me, sometimes in tears, thinking that they have Alzheimer's. And it is just some of the slowing down that happens with processing. But this is different. This is persistent, and it's a gradual worsening for sure.
So are there particular tests that you can take in order to see if you do have Alzheimer's?
Yeah, so Medicare requires now that every patient that is on Medicare in their annual physical have a memory test. So there are several different ones that we can use. Some are very simple and quick, others are a little bit more involved. And what this does is really test short-term memory. Short-term memory is the issue. When you can find somebody in late stages of dementia, and they can tell you exactly what happened, you know, 60 years ago, but they can't tell you what they had for breakfast or what room they were in a few minutes ago. So we come and there's a complaint. Again, oftentimes a spouse or a family member will bring them, and we say, well, let's try these screening tests here. And they're just screening tests. They are not definitive things. It just kind of gives us a sense like, is there a problem here that we should investigate further?
So if you do find that someone does have Alzheimer's, what about treatment options?
Well, before even we get to that, we have to determine what actually, is this actually an organic cause such as Alzheimer's or what is even more common, vascular dementia? Or is it a complication from a medication maybe that they've been put on, or a combination of medications? Or are they ill? Are they ill with something? Do they have some kind of condition? So we would want to do basic lab work and make sure that there isn't even, say, like an autoimmune condition or something like that. And then if that's all good, then we kind of go to something more invasive or specific, like an MRI of the brain, to see if there's actually the specific changes that are particular to Alzheimer's versus another kind of brain deterioration.
What is your advice to parents, children who see something like this happening, and how can you take care of them in a loving way?
Yeah, so first is, of course, honest but gentle discussion. Mom, Dad, I see this happening to you. What do you think? And then if you can actually bring specific examples where that's kind of hard to refute, and then you say, let's go to the doctor. Let's get some testing done, and I'll go with you, and just so that whatever happens, I'm here for you, and we'll do this together. And then as the results come in, it's frightening. It's frightening because especially in the beginning, the person is aware. But a hallmark of the disease is that as they go on, they become less aware, and sometimes that leads to denial, even more denial, and then anger. Sometimes just because of the changes in the brain, their personality can change for sure. Some people get angry, some people get very docile. Yeah.
So that's really something. I mean, you do need to pray about it as well.
Yeah, I think so. As Christians too, we have to recognize that, this is one of the ways that living in a fallen world gets manifest. Some of us get, let's say physical diseases. Other of us get these brain conditions. But it's the slow, gradual deterioration that is the hardest thing, and especially for family members, because you never quite know when you're going to lose them entirely. And then there's also a fluctuation too. So one day they could be good, and you're like, well, maybe they're okay, and then the next day not. It's exhausting.
Exhausting, yes, for sure. Dr. Rayner, we do need to take a break, but I know you're going to be sharing your personal journey coming up. Welcome back. In our last segment, Dr. Richard Rayner shared the signs of Alzheimer's disease and dementia. There are many challenges of caring for seniors with these disorders. Dr. Rayner joins me once again to share his family's journey. Dr. Rayner, why don't you share with us your personal journey with dementia?
Yeah, so I had a father who was a very smart man. Not particularly well educated, because back in the Depression you didn't get a lot of education. But we started to notice when he was in his, let's say, mid-70s, that not all the cylinders were firing like they were before. And that was manifested with him losing the ability to find words, like I had mentioned earlier. But then that progressed to where he was mostly losing his voice, I would say. Eventually it was literally his voice. He didn't, but he stopped speaking. But even before that, there was just this sort of a glassing over, a confusion. He would get up from the living room and walk into his bedroom and stand there and turn around and like he was trying to figure out why he had even done that. And then he would just turn around and come back out and sit down again in the living room.
Wow.
At my oldest son's 16th birthday, he was going to recite a poem, and we had a room full of 16-year-olds and plus family members, and it was a disaster. And it was so heartbreaking, because this is a man who worked as a corporate controller, and so doing figures in his mind was no problem at all. He was always calculating the tip on his own, and you know, just things like that. And he was really reduced to somebody who could really just sit there and stare. And eventually, like I said, he just stopped speaking.
Wow, this must have been very difficult emotionally.
Yeah, it was difficult, particularly for my mom. So at this point, they had been married, 60 years, I think. And she was a very kind, caring, loving wife, was with him through thick and thin. But this was something that she couldn't impact. So the real tragedy came when 2 times in one day she had to call 911 to get him off the floor on the same day. And that's when I leveled with her and said, Mom, this is not what EMS is for. He has to go now to where he can be cared for. And she felt like a failure, but she herself was 80 and he was bigger than she. And she wasn't trained as a nurse. She just had no capacity to handle this large of a situation. Plus, they lived alone. And my nearest sibling was like 30 minutes from them, which was better than 0, but there was nobody to actually intervene and help care for him.
How did your faith help you through and your family through this journey?
Yeah, so my parents were always, great examples of what it meant to trust in the Lord, and they were faithful. They were the same people in the house, on the street, at church. And so, so we were all operating from that kind of assumption that there is a God, that he loves us, and that he's in control. But it was very challenging for my mom, who as part of that felt that caring for her husband was such an important thing. So she did struggle, I think, with feeling not anger with God or anything, but just, I think, a disappointment in herself. But we all prayed locally and from afar, and we prayed that nothing tragic would happen. But in the families where there's a lot of denial, oftentimes it takes a tragic thing to push people to, what needs to happen, which is get the person in a safe environment.
Dr. Rayner, thank you so much for sharing that very personal journey with us.
You are welcome. Thank you.
And stay with us. We will be back right after the break.
Well, welcome back. Well, years ago, on a flight home to Pennsylvania, I sat next to a young Iranian engineering student studying at Stanford. I learned about his family, I learned about Persian poetry, and the life he dreamed of. We've been in touch this week, texting. He's optimistic, of course, pretty unsure about what comes next for his country, for his family. And like millions of young Iranians and Israelis and Palestinians, he cannot wait for life without conflict. He's never lived life, though, without the drumbeat of war. If you're a follower of Jesus, you and I have the privilege right now, in this moment of worldwide confusion, even chaos, of carrying the message of the gospel. A waterfall of hope to a world on fire. That one day all the broken things will be fixed, that skies filled with missiles and drones will someday no longer be battlefields, that the creator of the world will himself wipe away every tear, raise the dead, and make all things new. This weekend, share that hope. Pray for courage to share this old, great story. For Debra and the entire Morning Light team, I'm Jeff Coleman. Thanks for spending your week with us. Check on your neighbors, and we'll see you again Monday morning.